It is my special pleasure to bring Alison Zak up here. I'm giving her a shout out, especially because she was one of our core conference organizers. So Alison will be taking us to Beaver School. Alison is an anthropologist, an educator, and she is the founder and director of the Human-Beaver Coexistence Fund based in Northern Virginia, where she works to help landowners and managers practice non-lethal beaver management and to promote human-wildlife coexistence.
Thank you, Claire. Time for Beaver School. So I am someone who came from actually the academic world of anthropology. So it's great that I'm following Barbara's talk. And what actually happened to me, and I'll talk a little bit more about this experience in my talk tomorrow, but I basically briefly became disenchanted with academia and wanted to have that more applied and immediate impact. And that's what got me into environmental education. So I have about 9 years of experience in environmental education. I am a Nat Geo certified educator, which is a framework that I'm going to bring into this talk a little bit later. But also, most recently, I'm, like Claire said, the founder and director of a new organization within the past year called the Human-Beaver Coexistence Fund. And also you should follow me on Twitter and all the social medias. So very briefly, what HBCF does, this is our mission, but I summarize it by saying we help people understand why it's important to coexist with beavers, and then also how, the two really important questions. And so this talk is going to focus a lot on the why and actually helping younger audiences to understand why. And then in my talk tomorrow, I'll get more into the how from a theoretical perspective from my anthropological background, but then also super applied for practitioners because that is what I do now. So if you stay till the very end of the conference, you'll get to hear me talk about monkeys and all of that other stuff. So for HBCF, I started to do educational programs basically as soon as we got the organization up and running because that's something I had already been doing. And this is just a list from our website of the programs that we offer. We have, in the year that we have been functioning, taught over 650 students. And you don't have to read into these descriptions, but basically what I was doing was I used to be an environmental educator with a very broad range, and then moving into this focus on a specific species, the one we all love, beavers. And so you'll see here kind of the range of offerings from pre-K all the way up through 8th grade, although I will teach literally any age. It just tends to be more of a customized process and working with the teacher in the older grades. So also what you can see here from these program descriptions are some of the ways that I will take focus on a single animal and make it very broadly applied for teachers who are maybe working in any different part of their curriculum in any grade level throughout the year. So you can see some that are focused on adaptations, for example, some that are focused on interactions with other species in an ecosystem, and some that are focused more on conservation or restoration for the older grades. And so these are briefly the thing that I started to jokingly call Beaver School when we got started, and then the name stuck. So a lot of people reach out to me because they're super passionate about beavers specifically, and they want to be able to bring these types of programs to their communities, but they don't really know where to start. So this is just a list of the things that I roll around in my little cart, which you can find out in the hallway, and some of these example materials. These are things I always have in my little rolly box of tricks that are useful for lots of different types of programs. Things like a beaver puppet for younger kids is always a hit. Things like replica skulls and tracks and casts and all of those things. Chewed sticks, which all of us can probably find wherever we work. I keep a jar, literally, of oil and water to show the waterproofness of beaver's fur, and then lots of different pictures and books and things. I am also a book nerd, so these are some of my favorite books to recommend for youth programs about beavers. Some of them, so like 5 Busy Beavers there, I use this one. For the pre-K programs, a couple of these are really great for actual like nonfiction scientific information and great color photos. I use this awesome comic book for my specific lesson about beaver adaptations because it just kind of frames the beaver adaptations in like the superhero context, which of course kids love. And then I just wanted to specifically call out this book here. We've all probably heard the story of the skydiving beavers. This is a book that I used to recommend, and then I learned that it does not incorporate Indigenous narratives of that story in Idaho, and so I no longer recommend that book. And I don't include this to like call out that book, but just to say, as an educator, this is just a little aside that it's also our responsibility to be intentional and mindful of the resources that we're using so that we're conveying the right stories. And then back to those educational materials, I have a lot of them out on the HBCF table in the hall if you want to like come chat with me later and see my box of tricks. So some tips so far. A lot of these programs, since I no longer work on a nature preserve, I don't have that physical space to teach in. I'm going into a lot of schools. And if you are trying to go into the classroom, public schools, private schools, mostly public for this first tip here, it's really important to consult the state standards of learning for whatever state that you're working or teaching in. This is a way that you're going to get teachers on board to come into your class and do something called Beaver School, which a lot of teachers are going to be like, what is that? But you can convince them that it's useful to them as the teachers and to their students by really connecting it to the existing curricula that they're working from. So there's an example up here from the 3rd grade science SOLs in the state of Virginia. And I just literally took 2 sections from that website. And under life processes, you can see how very easily a lesson about beaver adaptations would fit perfectly. Living systems, there's again, all of these ways, all the ones I've circled in red, I can easily connect to a lesson about beaver ecology or behavior or multiple of those things. Another recommendation that I have is to start with a defined pilot phase. So like I said, I'd been doing environmental education for years, but I had not done something as specific as this Beaver School program before. And so I had one teacher contact at an Arlington public school in Virginia. And I said to her basically, hey, I want to reach as many grades in your elementary school as I possibly can. I want to test out my programs, see how they work in the different age groups, and I will waive the program fees for you. And I ended up teaching every single student in that school, and I was able to teach every single one of those programs that I showed you on the first slide. And I evaluated the teachers for their feedback, which I will get more into later, but it was very useful to kind of approach it that way, have like a test school with a contact that you have to kind of test out your programs. Also just know that school partnerships take time. We all know what schools, especially public schools, teachers, the districts are just, since COVID especially, but always they're struggling. So if you're frustrated that schools aren't catching on to your Beaver programs right away, just know that those relationships can take a lot of time, and be patient with yourself and with the system. And then when you are in the classroom, expecting varying degrees of teacher support. So you might walk into one classroom where the teacher's so excited about beavers and ready to connect your lesson, and she's prepped the students, or he. And then you will also walk into other classrooms where the teacher is like, thank God you're going to take my kids for an hour and talk to them about beavers. And be just flexible and ready for that to happen either way. And then finally, something I'm very passionate about, when people are interested in starting to develop these educational programs, the one thing I want to just shout is don't reinvent the wheel. We have this pressure as educators sometimes to constantly be coming up with these really innovative ideas. And there are some Beaver lessons and activities that I didn't come up with myself. They stand the test of time. Building a dam. It sounds so silly to us as Beaver people, right? But it is the perfect group, hands-on, like scaffolded learning activity that literally from pre-K all the way up through like middle school the kids love this activity. And of course you do it a little bit differently in the different grades, but don't reinvent the wheel here. Like if you're ever at a loss, do a dam building lesson. Another one that I also didn't come up with myself is the adaptation lesson that I keep referring to. I am the one who connected it into that comic book, but you dress up a kid as a beaver superhero, and you all through that process discuss all of those different adaptations, like the eyelids, the specialized eyelids, and the different layers of the fur. And the kids are physically putting on representations of those adaptations with common things that you can get like anywhere, or you may even have in your home already. So don't reinvent the wheel. Okay, so now we're getting into the evaluation piece. One of the things I do into every single classroom I walk into is I ask the students first thing, what do you already know about beavers? And we spend a few minutes of them just sharing their knowledge with me. And this is, oh, by the way, Wild Kratts, oh my gosh, this show deserves like so many awards. If a kid has seen an episode of Wild Kratts about beavers, they know more than you do, just trust me. And so what I have learned from this and what I get from this is, first of all, just understanding, okay, what am I walking into here? Do these kids know nothing about what a beaver is, or do they have some existing knowledge? And the other thing that I love to do is I love to look at these responses as I've accumulated them over time. I think I have almost 200 of these so far, and not every kid gets to participate. It's the kids that are sharing, like, hey, I have a beaver fact for you. And these are the most popular responses. And this is really interesting because it's a place that you can always, it's kind of what reveals to me that spark of curiosity for kids and beavers. And I might argue that you could even extend this to adults. The teeth, oh my gosh, the teeth. The fact that they chew, chomp, chop, use those teeth, like that is the one, this is your gateway into kids' beaver curiosity, are those teeth. Also the building behavior. So kids know that beavers build things. They usually know the materials that beavers are building with, but this is a great example of why that's a starting place, because they rarely ever understand the function of the structures that beavers are building. But that's the entryway, and that's how I connect with them initially. They share what they learn with me, and then we go from there. Common misconceptions are also revealed by that first question. The fact that they know that they're building something and it's made out of sticks and mud, but they don't really know what it's for. So I'll often get that they live in the dams. I get that from adults too, to be fair. Or that they're building some sort of bridge structure, but they don't know what a dam actually does, which is, again, totally understandable, especially for kids. That they eat wood, which, some of these aren't entirely wrong, but it's a starting place for getting more nuanced and then providing more information in the context of your lesson. And then other fun things I get. One said that beavers can fly, so then I just included the parachuting beaver picture. So again, some tips that I've learned from doing this little simple pre-evaluation that anyone can do. Begin where the students are, address their misconceptions, because now you know, okay, what are the misunderstandings in the room about beavers? And then getting more into some specific things that I've done. Using place-based and local examples is super important. At that school in Arlington, there was a beaver pond, also in Arlington, Virginia, that was getting actually renovated while I was teaching the programs. And I developed a lesson for the 5th graders, where they read an article that was online about this beaver pond renovation that actually stated that we needed to keep beavers out of the pond because of water quality. And then the students developed pro and cons lists, and they actually worked in groups to write letters to the Arlington Department of Parks and Recreation in support of or not in support of beavers being allowed to come back to that restored pond. And then we sent those letters to the Arlington Parks and Rec Department, and I'll show you a picture of them on the next slide. Another way to get students involved, so if you do have a nature preserve or a park to work in, it's great to do service learning type projects. You also see in a picture here of some students wrapping trees on a nature preserve. And then what they did, they took this back to the classroom And as kind of a review and a follow-up activity, the students designed signs, which would actually, in theory, go onto a cage that of a wrapped tree that explains to people who don't know why the trees are in cages about beaver coexistence and why those children wrapped that tree. And so this is just an example of one of those signs. Here's just a couple of the letters. So the 5th grade project I mentioned in Arlington, we mailed 15 letters and 13 of them were in support of the Beavers. I swear I wasn't biasing them on this activity. And 2 of the letters said, nah, don't do that. They cause too much damage. But it was, the teachers loved this, and so did the students. Another just cool example, this is a great picture book about the interaction between beavers and otters in a shared ecosystem. And so when I share this book with students, I make it locally relevant to them by showing camera trap photos that I have collected of a beaver down here in the corner chasing an otter away from its lodge. Or I don't actually say chasing, we don't interpret it that way, but there is a succession of photos showing the animals moving at blurry speeds in the same direction. So I let them come to that conclusion on their own. Then at the end of a program, we do a post-evaluation. And this is something that happens in any grade level that can independently write, so typically from grades 2 and up. And I ask the students the same question. Again, this is so simple. Anyone can do this. I ask them if beavers could talk to people, what would they say? And I use the answers from, so this is a much more involved process of analyzing eventually these data. I have about 250 responses to this question and counting. And these are some of the examples. I just want to read them to you because they're amazing. Dear humans, don't mess up our damp and bring us food, we hungry. Also, there's a storm coming. I'm going to build a dams to block it, be craffle. And on the bottom here, work hard, it pays off, and always watch otters, they are sneaky. So you can guess which lesson that one came from. But in addition to being really entertaining, these responses to that question are a great assessment of short-term learning outcomes. So you can see, you can match these responses up to the lesson that you taught and kind of get some information about what was really the most takeaway thing for those kids from that lesson. And one of the things, I'm trying to get something broader out of this eventually, which is to understand how the students, how the kids in my communities where I'm teaching these programs, how they think about nature. And so things that I will be coding for, because this is not even considered preliminary analysis of this yet, things I will be coding for in these responses include things like beavers' attitude toward humans, the role of like the human listener or receiver of this information, the elements of human-beaver collaboration, elements of asking or giving or receiving of permission, reference to the humans as a threat to the beaver's survival, and those sorts of themes. So that brings me into also acknowledging and managing your own biases as an educator. I mentioned that in the Arlington Pond very applied example, I didn't go in there saying like, I'm the one who advocates for beaver coexistence. I tried to be a very neutral person in that lesson so as not to bias the students. And like I said, there were a couple of groups who decided, nope, beavers should not be allowed at that pond. And also another thing that's really coming out so far to me with these responses is this idea of what I'm calling save the rainforest syndrome. And I don't know if I stole that term or if I thought of it, but it's basically this idea that, and I know growing up as a kid, I totally got this all throughout school, that humans are a menace to the environment and that we have to save the rainforest, and the rainforests are in trouble because of what we're doing. And that's not, I don't think that's so productive. And I also don't think that it's consistent with the mission of our organization, which is literally has human very first in its name, Human-Beaver Coexistence Fund. And so through these responses, I can start to think about in what ways the students have already been kind of provided these ideas or have these ideas that people are just bad for beavers. And I can start to think about how in designing future programs, we can address that and make it more about human-beaver coexistence. And then I'm not going to read the long one up there, but I liked the cartoon, "Get Off My Pond Lawn." So that's it for student evaluations for now. Teacher evaluation is something that I also do after every single program. And again, knowing how stressed and swamped teachers are, I send them a link to a SurveyMonkey, which has only these 4 questions. Basically, what was your favorite thing about the program? What could be improved? Would you be interested in future programs? And to share anything that came out of their students after the program, things that kind of that existed beyond the lesson that just the teachers would want to share with me. That one is totally optional. That's all I ask them. And this is so far what I have learned from those evaluations. Teachers love anything that has cooperative group work, group learning, hands-on, experiential, again, going back to that dam building activity that really can't be beat. Biofacts and things to explore through touch, which goes back to my box of tricks. Inquiry-based learning, so that's where that opinion forming and persuasive thinking, persuasive writing comes in for the older grades. Connections to their existing curriculum. So again, refer to your SOLs in whatever state you're teaching. Real beaver photos and stories. So those camera trap photos that I relate to a storybook. And then, especially for younger kids, moving, dancing, yoga. I'm also a yoga teacher, so I've got lots of weird beaver yoga things that I do with kids. Music, I can recommend some songs. So just fun, interactive things that also get the students up and moving around. Things that teachers would improve include more information ahead of time to prep the students. And this is a tricky one. If you're already an educator, you know we're kind of going in and out of schools and we're seeing people just one time. So some teachers would like to actually have that heads up, like here's what we're gonna be learning about, maybe some little lesson that they could do before you get there to prep them. Using technology in the classroom is something I haven't really committed to doing because every classroom has that different smart board with weird things that it feels like so intimidating for me to learn when I only have an hour in that classroom. And so making better use of that would be useful. More also, like the first point, more time to review the content from the lesson and or resources where the teacher can do that. So again, some teachers are going to be interested in that and some teachers aren't, and that's okay. And then some people, multiple teachers were like, bring a live beaver. And I was like, no. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the challenges through the talk, but again, as far as evaluation goes, these single standalone programs are in and out of a classroom. You're only ever probably meeting these kids once in some cases. They're notoriously difficult to evaluate for any longer term outcomes than like the evaluation that I've already shared with you. Again, if you're educators, you know this too well about evaluation, especially with environmental programs for the longer term outcomes. But other barriers, again, the schools are facing just lots of funding and COVID-19 limitations. And then, like I said, if you, I used to have 900 acres of a nature preserve for my classroom, and now I either have to partner with parks and protected areas to use their space, or I'm adapting these lessons for the classroom, which is always possible. Sometimes you can feel a little stuck inside, but if you want to chat through that with me, I'd be happy to. So the takeaways, these are a couple of things from the Nat Geo Learning Framework. Focus on cultivating attitudes of curiosity and empowerment. And hopefully through some of these examples, I have made that beaver specific for you. So what kids are curious about beavers and how you can empower them to be actual voices for maybe beaver management in their own communities. Also focusing on honing skills in observation, communication, collaboration, and problem solving. And again, literally, I just lifted this from the Nat Geo framework, and it matches up so well with those teacher evaluations and the feedback from those. You can also, so you don't have to be going into the classrooms to just teach a lesson on your own and then leave. You can be a resource for other classroom teachers. You can be a resource. Some schools that I work with, they do kind of a long ecosystem project. And instead of me instructing all of those students, I am a resource for those that are interested in certain topics. And then they can reach out to me, and it's more of an individual type thing. So classroom, I guess my point here is that classroom programs are not the only option. Engage in community science and educational technologies. Shout out to iBeaver and Caster Mapper. I haven't used these yet with students, but I have already so many ideas on how that could happen. And so students are learning, again, about collecting data, about sharing the information, and about what they're doing and observing in nature actually being useful to scientists and to other people, which is cool. And then always reach out to other educators. Sometimes, you know, we can feel like we're alone in the educating work, but if we're all having similar goals and doing similar work in different places, using each other as resources is so important. Oh, and something I wanted to point out, this is a really cool, I threw this graph up here because this is a project I did with middle school students at my previous job, actually, where we measured stump diameters around the nature preserve that I mentioned, where there's active beavers. And then we compared those data to Enos Mills and his work from like the 19th century. And look how similar those trends are of stump size preferred by the beavers. So anyway, these are just cool things that you can do with students and to connect it to something else to make it community science focused. These are some resources, references. Whenever I am at a loss for inspiration for anything environmental education, I go to this book right here, Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature. And also my email address is at the bottom of this slide. And before we finish, I'm gonna make you all do something that I do with the kids, which is again, popular literally at any age. So we're talking about the tail slap. And I asked them if they want to hear what a tail slap sounds like. And I tell them about the first time I heard a tail slap and how it scared me. And then we all take our hands, we spread them really wide. And on the count of 3, we are going to clap our hands at the same time, which blows the kids' minds, as loud as we can. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Nice job. Thank you. I'm done now.